Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of the One and Out podcast. I'm Joel Haas.
I'm Lyle Alenstein.
And I'm Lexie Linderman.
So today we'll touch on a few new things regarding Penn State's football program. First and foremost, we'll talk about the AP poll, which just dropped, first one of the season. So Penn State will open the year with the number 8 next to its name. How did you guys feel about Penn State's ranking?
I think it was fair. I mean, you look at all the teams ahead of them. The only one I'd make the argument for it to put over Penn State over them would be Notre Dame. Just because I never get the Notre Dame hype every single year, but then I saw something where like Notre Dame is actually like the most accurately ranked team based on like aside from the top tier teams, like where they finished like in the middle of the poll. So that was then I like took that argument away. Other than that, teams behind them, I think just Michigan. Obviously, I think Penn State's got a better roster on paper, but it's the classic Penn State can't be Michigan. Michigan always is better than Penn State. So other than that, I think it was pretty fairly ranked. I mean, FSU, I guess they went undefeated, and I mean they lost like all their players though, and we'll see what DJ Ukulele. I'm gonna call him Ukulele because I can't say his last name, but we'll see what he does with the Seminoles. But I think Penn State was ranked pretty fairly.
Yeah, I'd agree. I think Penn State's ranking is pretty fair. I do think though that like Missouri should be a top 10 team. And there's some other there's some other teams that I think their ranking could be a little bit different. But I think 8 is pretty good for Penn State. I mean, it gives them as of right now, they would be hosting a home game in the college football playoffs. So I think that's a good spot for them to be at the beginning of the season. But they have only finished above or at their ranking in the preseason AP poll twice in the last 8 years. So we'll see if they can actually like live up to this ranking. But yeah, I think it's fair based on what they have on paper coming into the season.
Yeah. Other Big Ten teams in the ranking, Ohio State finished number 2 overall with 15 first place votes. Oregon was number 3 with 1 first place vote. So Penn State will have a big matchup against Ohio State coming up, obviously. And then Penn State, like you guys mentioned, finishes one spot above of Michigan, who falls down to number 9 after winning the national championship last year. USC comes in at number 23. And then Iowa, of course, comes in at number 25, which just feels like a perfect spot for Iowa every year. And it feels like they'll probably just stay there for the entire year. And then you go into the others receiving votes category. Washington was in there, West Virginia was in there, Wisconsin was in there. So 3 teams that Penn State will play this season, all in the others receiving votes, not necessarily ranked, but when Penn State makes the trip to Morgantown, West Virginia won't have a number next to its name necessarily, but it's still a pretty decent team. I think they come out to like number 32 if you actually like count it out based on others receiving votes. But yeah, and Lexi, like you mentioned, as of now, Penn State would be in line to host a first round playoff game, which would actually be against Michigan as the number 9 seed, which would be kind of funny. So they would get to play Michigan this year, um, despite not having them on the regular season schedule. But I don't know, were there any teams that kind of stood out to you guys as, you were surprised where they were?
I mean, I'm a Clemson and Miami hater. I get like ranking
So just like
Clemson.
an ACC hater, basically.
No, I'm a huge Boston College guy, but yeah, I think they were snubbed. Not actually, but I don't know. Clemson, like I get ranking Clemson just because the ACC this year is not going to be a good football conference. Just yeah, and I guess I'd put them at the favorite based on their schedule, but I don't know. We'll see. Just Dabo needs to use the portal. That's probably why I'm so anti-Clemson at this point. Yeah, if I would rank them, I'd throw them in the 20 range, but we'll see. And then Miami, like I know Miami, this is Notre Dame, but like worse. They just get so hyped up every single year, and they just never deliver. I know you're paying Cam Ward like $3 million to play for you, so like hopefully that does something for you. But when you're should be kneeling the ball last year to end the game and you end up fumbling and losing to Georgia Tech, I feel like that says something about your program and how they should be viewed. So that's just that.
I think Arizona and Kansas State are both too low. I think Arizona was supposed to be really, really bad last year, and then they kind of blew everyone away. And I don't think um they've gotten that much worse. I think like they're ranked 21. I think that's like 10 worse than they finished last season. I just feel like that's pretty low for them. I think they'll um go above their expectations this year, just like they did last year. And I think Kansas State is being a little disrespected. I think they have a really good roster. I think they could finish top 15. I think they should start top 15. I think they had a really good year last year. So those are the two that I kind of that I saw first glance that I was like, that's a little low. So
Dante Cephas, Penn State legend, bringing Kansas State to the promised land. I also think it was interesting how Kansas was ranked 22, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah, 22. I mean, obviously, they don't have Cole Nicky anymore. And that offense is still has a lot of talent. Obviously, the Big 12, not this. I'd put them, behind the Big 10, the SEC, obviously. But I think other than the Pac-12, because the Pac-12 is not there, there's a lot of offense in that conference. And I think that'll be interesting to see, because I still think Kansas is a really good program and they've got a lot of good offensive pieces. But I just will be curious to see what they do on offense.
And notice Colorado is not ranked in the preseason AP poll. Just want to throw that out there. They got one vote. So one voter put Colorado at number 25, and that was it. But I did want to talk about someone released like every single voter in their ballot where they put Penn State. So we actually got to see like where Penn State was according to every voter. And one voter had Penn State as the number 5 team in the country. And then one voter, the lowest, had Penn State as the number 18 team in the country. Besides that, they were only down to number 13. So that was kind of an what's it called, an outlier there, which I thought was a little bit interesting. It was Greg Medea, I think that's how you say it, who had Penn State below Iowa State, Texas A&M, Virginia Tech, Iowa, the team they beat 30-0 last year, which I just thought was interesting. And like, it's too early in the season to actually like call him wrong, because he could end up being right at the end of the year. We can come back and revisit it, but I would be very curious just to hear kind of what went into that decision, why he had Penn State down at 18 when nobody else had them lower than 13. So maybe we can get him on the pod and have him kind of defend that decision. That was kind of interesting to me. But yeah, I mean, overall, where Penn State lands, number 8, I think pretty fair. That's pretty much in line with what we've seen from, every media outlet, lines up pretty well with the coaches poll and everything. Every kind of power ranking pretty much has Penn State in that range. So I think the expectation for Penn State this season is, make the playoff, potentially host a game. And if you do get to host a game, I think the expectation is that you win that game, and move on to the next round. And I think if Penn State can do that, the season would be considered a success for most of the fan base. But moving on from the AP poll, we can touch on kind of what we heard from Penn State at Penn State Media Day, which is basically like Christmas for the reporters. You get to talk to every coach, every coordinator, pretty much every player except for the freshmen, because we never get to talk to them. But yeah, it's pretty much just, go wherever you want, talk to whoever you want. So, I mean, I know you guys got to walk around. What were kind of some of the interesting points that you took away from that?
I think we should start with Franklin did not address the Kavion Keys, Jimmy Lyons situation. We had the team spokesperson right before Franklin took the press conference stage say he's not going to be speaking on it, and no one decided to follow through on that. So I think that just kind of says something about the severity of the situation. Just something to note. But I think big takeaways for me was Max Granville. A lot of praise thrown his direction. I know I talked to Deion Barnes and then Tom Allen again in the breakout session, and they just nothing but praise for him. So that was, I thought, interesting. And then other than that, you had Tom Allen reinforcing Abdul Carter week-to-week decision on D-end and linebacker. So I thought that's another good thing to see, because I think the linebacker depth is pretty thin at this point, honestly. And even with Jameel Lyons and not with the team anymore, and Zariah Fisher hurt for an unknown period of time right now, I still think that D-end group is deeper, because you've got Amin Vanover and you got Smith Filbert, who I got to talk to, and he's got a chip on his shoulder, and I put a piece up on that. I think hasn't played football in 2 years, even coming off that big Outback Bowl performance against Arkansas, and a lot of people are saying good things about him. So I think it's interesting to see. And then obviously Franklin and whoever talk about, the wide receivers are going to do good. They're going to be great. Chip on the shoulder, something to prove. So I'll believe it when I see it. I mean, I definitely think that the emotions that they have are really starting to show, and how they're actually really ready to prove people wrong when you just talk to the wide receivers and not just hearing it from coaches and coordinators. So I think those are my big takeaways from Media Day.
I think my biggest takeaway was the defensive backroom as a whole, the safeties and the cornerbacks. Franklin and Allen are talked in their press conferences how confident they are in the whole defensive backroom. Specifically Allen, he touched on how when he came in, he thought cornerback was like kind of a concern, and now he thinks it's one of the best rooms in the country. I talked to Zeki Wheatley a bit, and everyone's been saying in the spring that he has made such a big jump, and they only reinforced that in the summer. And Zeki seems confident in all the safeties. All the cornerbacks seem super confident. So I think that's going to be a big thing for Penn State this year is having a really good secondary. Then also, I just think everyone just seems super, super confident in Tyler Warren's ability too. And I think that's huge, having him come back. I think it's going to be a really big, important piece for this offense. And the third takeaway I kind of had was the running back room. I think all offseason people have kind of been like disrespecting them and because Singleton had a bit of a down year and everything. But I think they're really hungry. I think Kolnicki's offense is really gonna do them well. And I think they're gonna have a huge year, and everyone kind of feels that way in Penn State's locker room too.
Yeah, I think personally one of my biggest takeaways was that some of the freshmen were getting a lot of praise. And it sounds like a lot of them can be contributors. I know Lyle, you mentioned Max Granville, who shouldn't even be a freshman. He should be a senior in high school right now, but he was getting a lot of praise for his ability to just step in pretty seamlessly, and kind of pick it up really quickly. So maybe he'll, be a rotational piece this year. And then we've heard a lot of really good things about Cooper Cousins, how he's staying on the practice field until like 11 p.m. at night every night after the rest of the team leaves, and James Franklin is walking out of the building and he passes by Cooper Cousins just out by himself in the dark, running through like pass sets, practicing with his headphones on, things like that. So some really impressive stuff from Cooper Cousins, who might make a push to start either at center or at guard, wherever he can kind of find some time. But seems like he can play both, and seems like he's the guy that the staff really wants to get onto the field this year. And then we've also heard some good stuff about wide receiver Tyser Denmark, just the way that he's stepped in and impressed the staff. And that's, a position of need, obviously, where Penn State's looking for some people to step up in that wide receiver room. He's not one of the names that typically gets thrown around. You always hear, Fleming, Wallace, Omari Evans, Liam Clifford, guys like that, Caden Saunders, but, maybe turn your attention to a true freshman, Tyser Denmark, who could come in and make an impact there. So I think there are some freshmen on this team who could really contribute this year, which wasn't really the case last year, I would say. I think like Tony Rojas was probably the biggest freshman contributor. And outside of that, I don't know if anyone really got, a notable, amount of snaps. So I thought that was kind of interesting. Maybe Penn State's freshman class is a bit more college ready than the last cycle was. So maybe Penn State will get some more contributors that way that people weren't necessarily expecting. And maybe a bit more resemblant of 2 cycles ago where you had Nick and Katron and Abdul, guys like that coming in as freshmen and competing. So it might be more similar to that class.
I think just to run with that, obviously you've got those freshmen that contributed when they got to campus, but then you look at them now in their junior year, they talked a lot. I think a big point of emphasis just throughout the whole media day was leadership. And I know Nick talked about taking on an expanded leadership role. And then I talked to Drew for a while at the end because, he had some other media obligations prior. I was in the trenches in that scrum, but I got to talk to Drew for a while at the end and just talked a lot about like his journey, obviously getting that reps in during that first game against Purdue, and then just how he's kind of evolved just mentally and as a leader now going into year 2 as a starter. And it just, obviously, I wasn't covering the team last year, but it just seemed like was way more poised. And like, he even said like he's more comfortable being himself and just saying like he's ready for that leadership role. That first year under his belt was huge, not only just from an on the field perspective, but he learned more about himself mentally and just how to control himself. Because he talked about how he's becoming more of a vocal guy, but he said he's always going to be more of a lead by example kind of player. And I think that's something he's kind of elevated more towards himself, because he's like, obviously he had expectations last year, but he's got to control that more internally, and he's just got to do what it takes to help himself as a leader and just as a player in order to bring the team forward.
Yeah, and that's going to be important because we don't have any team captains officially announced. Last year, Franklin went ahead and announced all of the captains during Penn State Media Day. This year, he didn't. He said, if the team knows in advance and they kind of have a good feel for who those guys are going to be, they'll go ahead and announce it. But this year, they're not really sure yet because no one's really kind of stood out to them as the obvious answer. They're still trying to kind of find answers there, and it's always a vote among the players on the team. So it'll be interesting to see who they choose as their team captains this year, because there's no kind of obvious leaders in that room. And that was kind of an issue last year, I would say, as well, where they had a hard time kind of finding those guys who can step up. If I had to put in an early prediction, Devon J. Thomas.
I like the Devon J. Thomas pick. I would log a crystal ball there for that as well. I would say on the defensive side of the ball, I would add Jalen Reed. I think just because he was at Media Day, I think that was just an indicator of how Franklin, how highly he thinks of him, because he only brings seniors to that. And then offensively, I would say I would put Drew. I mean, I think, yeah, enough said. QB1, he's ready for it. I'm better, more prepared. And then I would say Nick Dawkins and Tyler Warren would be the other two guys I would pick. I think Dawkins, he's just been a staple of that room, and he was a vocal presence last year, even though he didn't have that starting spot. And then obviously Tyler Warren, he's always just been a leader regardless of where he is. He's always just had a good head on his shoulders, and I think he's ready to take the team. Special teams, on the other hand, don't have an answer for you there. Don't have an answer for you there.
I also think on defense, Jalen Reed's a good pick. I mean, talking to him at media day, he seems a lot like really mature. I mean, obviously, like Lyle said, it says a lot that Franklin chose to bring him, and he's just a really fun guy. I mean, Franklin even said at Penn State Media Day that he, after the second day of practice, talked to the whole team about the wide receivers. And I mean, obviously, he's a defender. I mean, he's playing against the wide receivers, but just addressing the team full wide like that, I think that's captain material. And then on offense, I think Tyler Warren would be my pick. I think that he's doing a great job with not only leading all the young tight ends, but also just leading the entire offense just because he is such a veteran presence there. But I also think Drew's a good pick for that as well.
Yeah, Tyler Warren's an interesting pick just because like obviously his on-field production is there. You know, he's one of the key pieces of the team. He'll be one of the leading receivers for them this year. But then also I heard a lot, especially last year, not as much this year, but I heard the phrase silent killer used a lot to describe him. Kind of more of a quiet guy, you know, sits in the back, doesn't really speak up too much in front of the team. So it'll just be interesting for me to see because again, his on-field production, you know, kind of loud on the field. You definitely notice him for sure, but then it sounds like off the field, he's more of a quiet guy, which I wonder if that kind of hurts his chances of being a team captain this year. But we'll see what happens there because obviously the skills are there. And every time we get to talk to him at media, you know, seems very polished. They actually like to put him out there. We obviously don't get to pick who we get at media, but you know, they like to give us Tyler Warren at media just because he's very well spoken. They know he's not going to say anything that's going to embarrass the team or anything like that. So they like to give us Tyler Warren. So we get a whole lot of Tyler Warren stories out there. That's it for today's episode. Thank you guys for watching. For more football coverage, you can find us at psucollegian.com and follow us on socials.